So now that we have our networking manager set up here, how do we then see at least something? Because we're printing this data list, which should have our JSON payload. Well, let's go to our content view here. Now, it's easy for us to think that, well, we can just come down here and say networking manager like that and hope for the best. Well, if you save this, try to run, we're going to have issues. The reason why is because network manager doesn't return a view. And anytime here inside of a body, we have to show something that returns a view. So this wouldn't work. But what we can do is actually come here, say var, call this networking manager as such. It's going to be equal to networking manager like this. Okay, now that we've instantiated it, if we save this and run, hopefully we should see something in our console. Now we have to actually open our console to the bottom here, and voila, you can see, it looks like I see something there. Let's make sure this is a little bit bigger, and voila. So we're getting the information, folks. That is indeed good news. That means we are getting stuff. As you can see, a lot of information there. All right, that's always encouraging. But the problem persists here. Yes, we have our information because we see that we printing it out here inside of a dispatch queue main async. But then the question persists. How do we then show in a list this information showing here in a list? Well, at this point, it's very simple. We can put in a list. Remember list, and I'm going to pass data here. What data do we need? Well, it's going to be network manager as such, and I need to invoke the dot data list, right? Because the network manager has the dot data list, and then here what I'm going to do is I'm going to put inside there. I'm going to say data in, and I can say text. It's going to be equal to data dot. Let's see what properties we have. Let's go back to our data list entry here. Let's get a title. Why not? So data dot title like this. Now can save and give it a run. Right, looks like we have a problem here. Right. So it says here, instance member data list cannot be used on type networking manager. Now, one of the things that we have to realize here is because we understand that networking manager is indeed of type observable object. Now, because we want to make sure that this is actually connected to our content view, which is the part that we show the data, right? The view per se, we actually have to come here and say observable or observed object. Okay. Again, the reason why we have to do this is because this network manager here, let's jump to that. Remember, we said this is observable object, meaning that it's something that can be observed. However, when we actually calling it, we need to make sure that this variable that we are attaching this information to has to be this @observed object. That way this view here will know that, okay, whenever we get this network manager, it's going to return something for us, which means then me, in this case as a content view, a view to show something, I'll have to redraw myself with new data if need be. All right. Now, the other problem I have here is that I'm calling the actual type. This has to be this networking manager here. My bad. So let's go ahead and add that one. We shouldn't have any problems right now because that is the instantiation that we created there. So, and voila, just like that, you can see now we're able to get all that information in our list. Okay, of course, this is still working here. We can just put it down there and close it down. And just simply, we have all the information showing. All right, very good. Of course, as you know, we can pass a few modifiers here. Let's say I want font to be title, and I want foreground color to be maybe gray. You can play around with all that because now we have that data. We can do all sort of things. Okay, there we go. Very good. Now, the beauty here is that our networking manager here, we can always use whenever we want to go and parse JSON APIs, right? Because essentially the same thing happens all the time. There's, of course, a few changes here and there, but in essence, the process is always the same. One thing to notice, though, and we'll talk a little bit more about the observable object at a later time with more detail. The important thing to remember is that we need to mark this as an observable. So we want to be able to broadcast to other views that, hey, I am an observable object, meaning that you can look out for whatever that I'm doing. I may change my data and so forth. And the actual variable that is holding the parsed data in this case has to be published, because we're publishing it to whoever is listening, in this case, a view. So SwiftUI knows that it needs to refresh the view with the new data or the data that it's been received. Okay. And of course, inside of our content view, that variable, of course, we have to also append the observed object to say that this is an object that's being observed, meaning, hey, great, we have the data, we can always change things. And as things change, the UI will also change accordingly to the data that is being served. That's it. And just like that, we are able to fetch data from a distant remote API.